what was the Tufo versus Attorney General? This was a very controversial matter in which the Supreme Court was invited to have a conversation about something Parliament has done. I'll say it in just one line in a minute. A nomination had been made by the President for the position of Chief Justice in the person of Chief Justice Apalu. Chief Justice Apalu had appeared before the Appointments Committee of Parliament. He had indicated to the Appointments Committee of Parliament that he needn't be there because he was already Chief Justice. You see, it's a bit technical, but we can understand it. The 1979 Constitution came in to replace the military regime of SMCD 2, SMC 1, and all of that. During the military regimes, Parliament was closed down. The military became the executive, but the judiciary was maintained. However, the soldiers never maintained the Supreme Court. So the court structure ends at the Court of Appeal because the responsibility of the Supreme Court is constitutional interpretation. Soldiers didn't want their decrees to be subject to interpretation by the Supreme Court. So when the soldiers come, they close down the Supreme Court. Those people were talking about coup. I don't know whether they've forgotten. Anytime the soldiers come, they close down the Supreme Court. So the highest court is the Court of Appeal. So, the Chief Justice is a member of the Court of Appeal. Now, the transitional provisions of the 1979 Constitution said that any judge who was with the Superior Court of Judicature, that means the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and the Supreme Court, we call it the Superior Court of Judicature. Any judge who was a judge of the Superior Court of Judicature will continue under the Constitution as a judge as if he was appointed under the Constitution. I'm sure you get that. So, if you were a High Court judge, during the coup time, you're a High Court judge. The Constitution comes, you remain a High Court judge as if you were appointed under the Constitution. Chief Justice Apalu was the Chief Justice. He was the Court of Appeal judge and the Chief Justice. And then the Constitution came. So his understanding of the matter was that he remains Chief Justice. He didn't have to be nominated by the President under the Constitution, but the President nominated him. He appeared before Parliament Appointments Committee. He indicated his resistance. The committee said he should be vetted. He was vetted and he failed the vetting. And so somebody took out a writ, Dr. Makutufo of blessed memory, took out a writ to the Supreme Court and said, Mr. Supreme Court, Parliament didn't have the power to vet Chief Justice Apalu because under the constitutional arrangement, he was already a Chief Justice, and therefore the vetting of Justice Apalu was unconstitutional. The point was raised by Joe Rinder of the Attorney General that, no, you can't say that Parliament's a master of his own procedure. Parliament has vetted him and determined that he's not fit to be Chief Justice. Even if he was Chief Justice already, Parliament has made the decision. Vetting, the Appointment Committee hearing, is a matter for Parliament. The court cannot come in. The Supreme Court said, no, we can come in. If Parliament has been determined to do something that is unconstitutional, then the Supreme Court will come in. So the Supreme Court came in, made a determination that the vetting of Justice Apalu was unconstitutional, that Justice Apalu was Chief Justice anyway, and nobody can change that. So that's the first time we heard that. That's the Tufo story. It's all done, but just to bring you the history, I'm building it up to today, and then we understand where these things are coming from. So that was Tufo and the Attorney General. Just as a matter of interest, for those of you who like the constitutional history, who were the lawyers in this matter? Okay, there we go. So for the plaintiffs, that is Dr. Makutufo. These were the three lawyers that represented Makutufo in 1979 who were urging upon the court that the court cannot, the court can interfere in whatever Parliament is doing so long as it's unconstitutional. They were making the point that Justice Apalu was already a Chief Justice and the vetting of Justice Apalu was unconstitutional. The team was led by Nana Akufo-Addo. It included Dr. Edmond Prempeh, who is today a chief in Menchia Palace, and guess what? Chachu Chikata. Time changes, isn't it? This is 1979. I'm sure a lot of you were not born. Okay, I was born, but I was small. So this is the set of lawyers who defended the Constitution and said that the Supreme Court, for the first time, they said the Supreme Court can interfere with Parliament. That the fact that Parliament is a master of its own procedure does not mean that Parliament can breach constitutional matters. It will be interesting to hear what Chachu Chikata says about the ruling of yesterday. Thankfully, all of them are happily with us. Dr. Prempeh is now a chief in Menchia Palace. Nana Akufo-Addo has already spoken about the ruling. Chachu Chikata hasn't. It will be very, very interesting to see what Chachu Chikata says about the ruling, because he it was who went to Supreme Court in 1979 to make the point that the Supreme Court can interfere with Parliament so long as Parliament is doing something unconstitutional. Chachuchi Kata said that in 1979 to the Supreme Court. Nana Akufo-Addo said that to the Supreme Court. Today, Nana Akufo-Addo has affirmed that position. We can't ask Dr. Prempeh because he's a chief, okay, unless you go to Menchia Palace to ask him. But Chachuchi Kata is around. The journalists should ask him. That's what I talk about all the time. They should ask him that, Mr. Chikata, you made these arguments before the Supreme Court in 1979. Your arguments have been upheld by the Supreme Court yesterday. Justice Jones Doche has upheld your argument, Mr. Chikata. Do you still stand by it or have you changed your mind? That would be an interesting question for journalists to ask him. But hold on, let's build the story. Okay, so congratulations to the three of them. They opened the eyes of the judiciary and the eyes of the law reports to say that, well, the courts can always interfere. Let's move on. Okay. So these were the lawyers for the defendant, that is Attorney General Joe Randolph and Mr. Archibald Late Jabate. The two of them represented the state and they were the losing party in the matter. So that's to for an Attorney General. Next came, we had to wait until 1997 for this matter of whether Parliament is a master of its own procedure to be tested again. In 1997, it was a bit more elaborate, and I'll go into it. What was the 1997 matter about? It was about vetting again. Can you imagine? 79 was about vetting. 97 was about vetting as well. It was about vetting. What was the matter? The matter was that the majority NDC in Parliament at the time had been the main party in Parliament in 1992 because the opposition boycotted the Parliament. And then in 1996, the opposition took up the seats in Parliament. They didn't win many. 61 seats were won by the New Patriotic Party. 5 seats were won by the Convention People's Party. And I believe 2 other independent candidates, including the legendary Hawa Yakubu Ogede, may she rest in peace. So 1997, January 1997, the opposition was in Parliament. And then, because NDC had been in Parliament alone in 1992, the vetting was uneventful. Nobody even remembers it. But the Constitution had required the vetting, of course. We remember it because Ekos Pilgabra was disqualified because he was not a registered voter. That's the only thing we remember from the 1992 vetting. Everybody went through. Speculations were arriving in the media that how is vetting going to be now that the opposition NDC MPP was in Parliament? And there was a lot of difficulty and rancor among the opposition and the government at the time. Rawlings was in full flight and J.H. Mensah and others were there. So everyone was anticipating what will happen. Okay. In the circumstance, a letter was sent to the Speaker of Parliament announcing the list of ministers. It was decided by the NDC at the time because they wanted to avoid the MPP people in the vetting committee. It was decided that, look, people who were already ministers in the first term of Rawlings do not need to go through any vetting. It is those who were not ministers who are coming for the first time that needed to go through vetting because they were trying to avoid the MPP doing the vetting thing. J.H. Mensah, who was minority leader, quickly took out a writ at the Supreme Court, reminding himself of Tufo and Attorney General, went to the Supreme Court to say, look, Parliament is going to violate the Constitution. I want the Supreme Court to speak about it. Let's hear the story about that one. So this is the case. J.H. Mensah versus the Attorney General. Let's see what the letters. Now, I want the letters after that. I want the letters, please. Okay, they'll get me the letters quickly and then we'll deal with it. Yeah. Okay, so so this is the first letter that was written by J.H. Mensah to the Speaker. J.H. Mensah is minority leader. He wrote to the Speaker. Okay, I hope they have the letter in detail. Is that all we have? Yes, okay, so this is the letter to the Speaker and it's signed by J.H. Mensah. These are the details. Okay, with reference to the President's letter to you on the 10th of February 1997, reference XYZ, and the various consultations that have taken place on the issue of the appointment of ministers, I will be very grateful if you would confirm that in submitting the names listed in the first paragraph of his letter as members of his new cabinet, the President was inviting Parliament to exercise its power of prior approval of their appointment as ministers. Now, this is J.H. Mensah writing to the Speaker, telling him that the letter that President Rawlings wrote to you with the ministers, was he inviting Parliament to exercise our right of prior approval guaranteed under the Constitution, Article 78, that ministers shall be appointed with the prior approval of Parliament? J.H. Mensah is asking that question of the Speaker. Okay, let's move on. The letter continues. J.H. Mensah says, I am seeking this confirmation in order to be assured that no action in Parliament is taken which in any way prejudices the determination of the constitutional issues raised in my writ, of which you have notice, I will be grateful for an urgent response to this letter. Yours sincerely, J.H. Mensah, Minority Leader. That's how sophisticated Ghana's parliament used to be. They write letters, they don't fight, they write. You see the quality of the letter. So J.H. Mensah says that he's seeking the confirmation from the speaker because he wants to be sure that no action is taken in parliament to prejudice the matter that he has raised before the Supreme Court, because he had by that time filed the writ to the Supreme Court. The speaker had notice of the writ for the Supreme Court to say whether or not parliament's prior approval is excluded from ministers who are so-called holdover ministers who were in the first administration of Rawlings. That's the concern here. Okay, let's see what happens. J.H. Mensah wrote that to the speaker, Justice D.F. Annan. Justice D.F. Annan then acknowledges J.H. Mensah's letter. On the same day, he responds to J.H. Mensah as follows. What does Justice Annan say? He says as follows. The letter is Honorable J.H. Mensah to Honorable Dear. It says, Dear Sir, this is Justice Annan writing, appointment of ministers, Article 78(1) of the Constitution. He says, I acknowledge the receipt of your letter, reference so and so, dated 13 February 1997, on the appointment of ministers, Article 78(1) of the Constitution. He says, my reading of the express words of the letter from the President's office leads me to the view that all the names of the persons proposed, whether they are retained ministers or newly nominated ministers, were submitted to the House for the purpose of the discharge of the House's constitutional responsibilities in relation to the approval of ministers. Full stop. He goes on. Processes and procedures leading to the approval or rejection of ministers remain entirely within the competence and authority of the House. I agree that no action may be taken in Parliament which, in terms of our standing orders, prejudices the determination of the constitutional issues raised in your writ, which is now pending before the Supreme Court. Fantastic. That's how it ought to be. And that's how it used to be. That's how it has to be again. That's how it's going to be. This is Parliament. The Speaker is writing to the Minority Leader. He says that, well, the letter that the President wrote to me, I believe that he's writing to Parliament for us to discharge our responsibility. However, how we discharge that responsibility, I think, is entirely within the context of Parliament. You remember the phrase, Parliament's a master of his own procedure. Speaker agrees that, I agree, however, that we should not do anything in Parliament that will prejudice the constitutional issues raised in your writ. Okay, so what did the Speaker do? The Speaker proceeded painfully to stop the Finance Minister, Richard Kwame Pepra, from reading the budget because the writ that J.H. Mensah filed was still pending before the Supreme Court. The writ was to determine whether Richard Kwame Pepra, who was the holdover finance minister, can continue to hold himself out as finance minister even without the vetting and the prior approval of Parliament. Therefore, Justice Annan decided that the budget cannot be read. Kwame Pepra cannot appear before the House and read it because he didn't want to do anything that will prejudice the constitutional issues raised in J.H. Mensah's writ before the Supreme Court. That's interesting. Let's see how the story ends up. Okay, now I want the opinion of the Supreme Court. I like the opinion. Put the opinion of Justice Akwa and Akins up there, and then we'll deal with it as we build up slowly to what happened yesterday. Okay, I believe now I have it. So what was the matter before the court? The court was asked that, can Parliament decide that we will not vet ministers because they were part of the first government of Rawlings, and Rawlings has won elections again? The court was clear. They said, in terms of prior approval, Parliament must decide what prior approval is. That when the Constitution has given Parliament a job to do, Parliament must decide how they do it. And so prior approval is not a term of art. It doesn't mean vetting. Now it means vetting because it's the standing orders. But at that time, they said it doesn't mean vetting. Parliament can decide that as many as are in favor, the minister comes and they say, we will do a voice vote to approve ministers. So you have Kojo Oponkroma is there, Minister for Information. And then they say, as many as are in favor, say, the ayes have it, Oponkroma is approved. He doesn't have to go through an interview or vetting like we do today. The Supreme Court said Parliament can do that. That's okay. So they said, those ministers must go through prior approval. Parliament must decide what prior approval means. But then let's move on. This is Justice Akwa writing at the conclusion of the ruling. Very interesting. He says, and I hope that everybody's listening. And when I say everybody, they know themselves. Everybody, listen. Okay. where the Constitution allocates power or function to any authority, like Parliament, and that authority exercises that power or function within the parameters of that provision and the Constitution as a whole, a court has no jurisdiction to interfere with the exercise of that function. Then I entirely agree that the doctrine applies in our constitutional jurisprudence. Okay, hold it. Aqua says, where the Constitution has given an authority, he says, like Parliament, to exercise a certain power, that power is exercised within the parameters of the Constitution. If they are doing that, if they are exercising the power within the parameters of the Constitution, no court can say anything. So Constitution says prior approval of Parliament. Parliament says, yes, we'll do prior approval. Send us a list. The list comes. Okay, prior approval means we all jump. Those who like upon chroma, jump. Or those who like upon chroma, bow down your head. Aqua says, that's okay. The Constitution has given the authority, Parliament, the power of prior approval of the President's ministers. They should decide how they want to do it. Whether they want to do it by vetting, whether they want to do it by whatever, their standing orders should decide. He goes on. He says, for this is what is implied in the concept of separation of powers. Great. He says that's what separation of powers is about. Let's move on. He says, but, and that's a very big but, and that but relates to what is happening today. But if by the doctrine it is meant that even where the authority exercises that power in violation of that constitutional provision, a court has no jurisdiction to interfere because it is the Constitution which allocated that power to that authority, then I emphatically disagree. Okay, we're getting somewhere, isn't it? Justice Aqua says that where an authority has been given something, they can do it. But if that should mean that even when they are violating the provisions of the Constitution in doing so, then he doesn't see how the Supreme Court cannot interfere. Parliament has been given the power to pass bills. They've been given the power to vote, and they've been given the power to do voice votes and counts and all of that. The Constitution has provided what a quorum means and what voting means. Justice Aqua, may he rest in peace, says that if that means that they can violate the Constitution, then he disagrees. That Parliament cannot violate the Constitution. That authority cannot violate the Constitution. Let's move on. There's another text in the same case by Justice Akins. He says, the courts cannot justifiably avoid its constitutional responsibility, and it will be palpably wrong to suggest that the courts will be usurping the constitutional function of Parliament if the court exercises its original exclusive jurisdiction to interpret and enforce the Constitution, as the Attorney General seems to contend. The fact that such matter involves a political question does not necessarily mean that it cannot be adjudicated upon. I like this one. This is more direct. This is Justice Akins speaking. Let's take it again and consider all the matters. The court here refers to Supreme Court. Akins says, the Supreme Court cannot justifiably avoid its constitutional responsibility, and it will be palpably wrong to suggest that the Supreme Court will be usurping the constitutional function of Parliament. Now that's what President Mahama is saying tonight. President Mahama seems to be saying that the Supreme Court is usurping Parliament. Justice Akins says no, they are not. He says it will be palpably wrong to suggest that the court will be usurping the constitutional functions of Parliament if the court exercises its original exclusive jurisdiction to interpret and enforce the Constitution, as the Attorney General seems to contend. The Attorney General then was Obeda Samoa. The fact that such a matter involves a political question, that's very interesting. And Akins said this in 1997. It's happened today. The matter of whether the Deputy Speaker can vote or not is a political question because it has to do with whether the MPP can pass the e-levy or not. Huge political question. Momentous political question. Justice Akins said that in 1997, that the fact that it involves a political question does not necessarily mean that it cannot be adjudicated upon. That's what he said. That's why sometimes they are asked to read. They have been told, you should read. Stop the shouting and rabble. Read. It's there. Akins said it in 1997. Tom, you haven't heard it. You are talking. He says that the fact that it involves a political question does not mean that it cannot be adjudicated upon. It's on page 22, page 232 of the Supreme Court of Ghana Law Reports 1997. It's right there. Justice Aiken said it. Justice Aqua has said something similar in the case of J.H. Mensah and the Attorney General, which involves a question of whether the Supreme Court can interfere with matters happening in Parliament. That has been decided upon in 1997. Anyway, let's get back to the story, and we're going to build up to today. We're not done yet. We're going to build up to today. We'll roll it out and then send your text message. We believe that by the time we finish, we will have led you to a certain conclusion that we will announce. Okay, so that's so this is the lawyers for J.H. Mensah and Attorney General. We did 1979. We're back at 1997. See who is still there doing constitutional matters, and see why he cannot resist talking about constitutional matters. Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo was there again. He was lawyer for J.H. Mensah. He was there. And with him, Tony Akoto Ampaw, his good friend, and now his lawyer, who is also lawyer for Vomaho, by the way. Akoto is lawyer for Vomaho. So Nana Akufo-Addo with him, Tony Akoto Ampaw, were the lawyers in the famous case of J.H. Mensah and Attorney General in 1997. And who were the lawyers on the other side? Hey, there you go. History is sweet, you know. History is sweet. The lawyers on the other side of the case, the losing lawyers, I should say, the lawyers who felt that the Supreme Court cannot interfere with Parliament and who lost the case. So Nana Akufo-Addo was on the winning side of the case. So remember, in this matter of whether Supreme Court can interfere with Parliament, Tufo and Attorney General has said it. J.H. Mensah has said both was urged by Nana Akufo-Addo on the Supreme Court, one in 1979, one in 1997. One he was with Chachuchi Kata, the other one he was with Akoto Ampaw. And then the losing lawyers is Dr. Obed Asamoah, the Attorney General for the state, and him. Badamushi Benz Kaiser, how is he doing these days? Martin Hamidu, how is he doing? Martin Hamidu was the other lawyer in the matter. History is always very, very, very important. Okay, so now the judges for Tufo and Attorney General, Justice E.M.P. Soa was the leading judge in 1979. This is Justice Apalu, about whom the matter was discussed in 1979.